cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity attacks have simply just skyrocketed. And numbers that we don't, numbers that I didn't go out and find, numbers that, others, IBM and others have put out, show thousands of schools, they're being inundated with these attacks.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
Welcome back for another practical episode on the Teacher Edition podcast. Today we're going to be unpacking a topic that touches each and every school in some way. This is also something that every person at every school is a part of. It's also a topic that isn't often discussed, or at least to the level it should be, in Christian schools. And that's why I'm particularly excited to be exploring it on today's episode. Before we jump in, a question for you. Have you subscribed to the podcast? You may be a regular listener, maybe you're just checking this out for the first time. No matter where you listen to your podcast, maybe Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is, there's always a place where you can follow the podcast. That really helps those episodes be right there in front of you in your account as they drop in each week. Hey, by the way, don't forget, you can always go back and listen to the episodes that you have missed, or maybe you want to re-listen to. Episodes are great for faculty development, teachers' meetings, just to share with other fellow educators. Our heart and our hope is that this podcast will be a blessing and a help, however you and your school chooses to use it. By the way, if I didn't mention already, YouTube. Don't forget you can now watch those interviews there. And of course, we are on social media as well. We are Teacher Edition Podcast on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Teacher Edition Pod. Once again, that's Teacher Edition Pod. If you haven't visited our website, go take a look. It's teachereditionpodcast.com. All right, let's get into today's topic. As educators, we're aware of safety. Really, we lock the doors to the school, we put up security cameras, we have extra eyes on site during events, we practice our drills. Those are all fine. That's great, and it's essential. But what are we doing to protect our devices, our networks, our digital life as a school? That's often an area where we become lax. We're just very trusting, if you want to put it that way. We often don't spend time investing or even learning, what actions and precautions we need to take. But all that does not make the threat to our digital assets or the necessity of talking about cybersecurity any less. It's really easy to think that, we're only a low-level threat. We aren't a target. Or honestly, that money and that amount of investment, that's really needed somewhere else. That's really all flawed thinking. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity for Christian schools. I was recently introduced to someone's, with a real heart for helping Christian schools be solid in the area of cybersecurity. Mark Zockoll has been where you are. He has a doctorate in Christian education, in educational leadership specifically. He served in Christian schools, both as a teacher and administrator over the past 10 years. He's also served as an educational faculty member on the university level. He and his wife have 4 children, and they currently live on the eastern shore of Maryland, where they're actively involved in their church. He's also a podcast host. He and his co-host, Matt George, have launched the Christian Principles podcast. I'm going to include a link to that here in our show notes, and I'm confident you're going to want to hop over and check that podcast out as well. And speaking of Matt George, we're excited to have him here with us today as well. So Matt has degrees in secondary social studies education and biblical counseling. He's currently an administrator at a Christian school in Salisbury, Maryland. He and his wife have 3 children, and they also serve together there in their church. So Matt, we are honored to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, cybersecurity isn't a topic, that I wouldn't put in a category as a frequent flyer on the topics, maybe a topic list for educators. I'm in many different conferences every year, and honestly, probably just one hand could do it for counting the number of times I've really seen any sessions even on that topic. That in no way means that it isn't a topic that shouldn't be talked about. It just means that it is an underdeveloped topic in Christian education, I think, in general. So you all have done some research and have done your homework on this topic. I'm going to branch out and say most Christian schools really haven't. So let's start there. There's so much for Christian school to juggle. Everyone wears multiple hats. Finances are always a bit tight. Personnel resources are pretty limited in their expertise on this type of topic. Is this really something that Christian schools need to add to their plate, or could we remove this from the things to worry about list? What do you think and why?
Yeah, I would say as a Christian school administrator, this is one of those topics that would easily get pushed down towards the bottom of the list of things we need to worry about until you start looking into the topic and realize, whoa, very quickly, we need to pull it up closer to the top of the list. For our school, we even had a school board member who is an accountant, and within his field, the amount of time and attention and training that goes into cybersecurity, he simply brought it up in a board meeting. What's the school doing? And shouldn't the school be worried about this? And when you start looking around at all of the devices that we do use, even in a small Christian school like ours, yeah, it's a big deal. We do need to take time and give it the attention it's due, because once you start that training, I'll say this because I've not been as involved in the research that Mark and one of our board members have dug into it as much as I have, but my eyes have been open. And it's a scary opening, but it's definitely necessary to go down this road and do the thorough training.
Yeah, what we've seen is that since COVID, schools have, as an industry, schools, public school, private school, doesn't matter, they have come under attack. Cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity attacks have simply just skyrocketed. And numbers that numbers that I didn't go out and find, numbers that, others, IBM and others have put out, show thousands of schools representing a couple hundred districts, and this is just our public peers that are being reported in this way, because we often don't even report ours. They're being inundated with these attacks, and they're losing. And specifically, as my friend James was saying, he is in the cybersecurity field, and he's working doing threat modeling and that sort of thing, and he's been a real an asset to us in these times of review and study. He makes the point to say our children, they don't have credit scores yet, but they got names and they got data, and look at the silos of information, or the silos of data holding that schools are. And that's a white black hatter's paradise, right? That's what they want to go and find. And they don't have to steal it from you and me. And perhaps our scores are already messed up a little bit, but if you get it from those unused but real people, how valuable. But we don't even want to think that. We don't even want to consider that that's a possibility, but it's a real possibility, and it really is. And further to the point, if those public school peers who are going to be demanded to put thousands and tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of $1,000s as districts into that kind of security for their data, man, I can remember, and I remember fundraising for technology, let alone maybe not even having a budget line item for technology. So if that's the case for them, yeah, I might be small potatoes, but maybe it's small potatoes easier to gather.
Sure. Yeah, we might be making it that way. So you threw out a few stats, a few items of information that are coming in about Christian schools in general. I understand you all administered a survey of Christian educators, teachers, and administrators concerning cybersecurity. Can you tell us about that? Tell us about the methodology of that study to start us off.
Absolutely. So my friend James Ravenai, another Christian university graduate who has an investment in Christian education, and because of what it is that he did and what it is that I do, we wanted to make sure that as we were seeing some of these things and some of these notes from whether it be IBM did a study about specifically educational ransomware attacks and whatnot. What they're saying around us is that 50% of educators, they either aren't concerned about any kind of cyber security attack, Or another one that just continues to it resurfaces, and I've seen it now as a present theme amongst the workshops and the Christian schools that we've spoken to, is that I'm not confident in what we're doing, but I'm at ease. I'm not worried about this. As Matt said, it's shoved down the priority list. So it's not that I'm actively worrying about it. It kind of is what it is. No one's going to come and get us. But so when we saw that information, we were really interested because we know that it wasn't Christian schools they were looking at this information. So James and I set up a survey that went out. It was answered by around 100 different educators representing 21 states across the United States of America, and answered 10 core questions. And those core questions focused on cybersecurity. And there were some really, really interesting responses that we'll get into as we go. But yeah, that was our methodology. It was largely a closed-ended questionnaire with one open-ended at the end. And we can, like I said, when we get into those numbers, we'll see more of what our Christian school peers have to say about what it is that we've seen, what our public school peers have to say.
I think it's interesting you've pointed out this is kind of a silent killer. In a Christian school, if it's not on fire, we don't often work on fighting it, right? We just we have so many other things to focus on. So I really like that you focus on if it doesn't seem to be an issue, so we're going to just let it go. But I want to hear about your results. So keeping on that same vein, talk to us about your results. What did you find concerning Christian schools? I also am wondering about the training that faculty and staff undergo. I know we've done some here at BJU Press. I don't know, boy, that probably started a couple years ago, just some constant reminders bringing it up. What are you finding in Christian schools?
So if we have a Christian school that's doing any training, it has not been long-standing. It has been, as you said, very recent. But here's just some numbers, okay? So 79.8% of our respondents said, I have never received cybersecurity training. That's flat out. I have never received it. And of course, what's left of that pie isn't all yeses. I've received it. We actually included ish in there. I've kind of had some to some extent. 70% of our respondents said they have never changed their primary passwords. They are quote unquote legacy passwords from wherever they got their stuff from, or when they first signed in, or when the administrator assigned them their Gmail or their Outlook or whatever it happened to be. Or in some cases, as we well know, our front desk lady, the bottom side of her keyboard has the password that's been there now for 20 years. So it is what it is. Or perhaps even post-it noted to the bottom of the screen. That's where the password happens to be. But
no one would look
70% never changed it. Another big one for us was we wanted to see, okay, if your school, maybe there's not consistent training, but do you at least know what you should do if an attack happened? So if you got phished, phished, what would you do if an attack happened? And we saw that 64% of our respondents said, I am not aware of student data policies, or at the very least, I need more clarity on them. So those were some of the big takeaways. Perhaps one of the biggest ones, 22% that said they have received some kind of resource concerning phishing attempts, cybersecurity, some kind of socially engineered attack. 48% said they don't even know where the resources would be. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do about it. So those were some of the bigger numbers we saw. And again, these are specifically, you had to be in a Christian school setting to answer this, or at least, as honest as we would expect our respondents to be, they had to be in Christian school settings in this year to be counted in this information. This data was taken in the spring of 2024. So
even our school was not doing any serious training up till honestly this year. Bringing in James, as has been mentioned a couple times, that is his industry. So I would have been that administrator of where do I go? I don't know what to do. I don't know what training is necessary. So that was a big thing for us as well. That yes, we were one of those schools of what do we do? And so we're just getting started as well.
So honestly, I think we'd be hard pressed to find someone who really hasn't heard the term cybersecurity. Probably most even have a general understanding of what it is. But this is a podcast for Christian educators, not necessarily for tech geeks. So how does this intersect with faculty and staff at a Christian school? Like, what can they do? Please don't say they have to change their passwords every day. That is traumatic enough for adults. Seriously, have you ever been in an elementary school computer lab on password change day? Like, we won't even go there. Like, oh, there's nothing to be compared to that. So, Mark, Matt, tell us, what about faculty, staff, and cybersecurity? What can they do?
Honestly, the first big one is change your passwords.
Oh, no.
Make sure you have strong passwords. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things. But it's, when you consider the reality of what could happen, and I think that we continue to go back to, well, it will never happen to us. Just like when we never, when we leave a door open because I don't want to go through the inconvenience of having to unlock it both times. And, it's not going to happen to me. Well, unfortunately, there are schools where it did happen to them. So if it's something so simple as, just changing a password, that ought to be easily done. And you're taking that to a greater level. And we as educators are constantly asking our students to stretch themselves and don't give in to just complacency. So we need to take ourselves to the next level as well. So, I mean, that's really the first place where we are starting of make sure that you are creating new passwords. Make sure, if you can, do multi-step verification as well with your secure sites. If it's available, because having two different devices that have to agree that, yes, you are that person is adding a much larger sense of security.
And as most of our schools are going to be using Gmail or Outlook, they want us doing this too. They provide for that back-end knowledge that really even someone who is able to make passwords and usernames for students and faculty alike, they should be able to go to the back end of the G Suite, the G administration page, and look through that, or just again Google what Microsoft would have you do. But these are no longer far away. The MFA is becoming easier and easier to use, and it's expected. Expected on most of our social media accounts. It's something we should probably expect professionally as well, as it has been in industries around us for quite a long time at this point. Because as James would say, with MFA, it's not 100% safe, but it's about as close to that 100 by being 99.999 whatever as it could be when you have those MFA steps in the process of setting and keeping your password. In fact, he would make the statement that if you have MFA set up, the consistent changing of password could actually bring about some kind of password stress and fatigue, which means with MFA set up, perhaps you don't even want to have multiple maybe like Matt said, every 6 months or so change a password, because what will wind up is happening, we'll have at BJ you press 1, BJ you press 2, BJ you press 3, and then how secure are we actually being when someone can guess that just as well as they could the first number as the third number? So reusing account credentials is not something that we would be suggesting. And there's a couple other quick notes to make, and I would say these are things that, as I think back to my faculty and my staff, man, I wouldn't be surprised if we were caught in this as well. Using shared accounts. We think about this personally, and one of the stats we came across from a survey that was done was that 78% of Americans share some kind of credential with a family member or a peer for one of their social medias or one of their content, but only 13% were concerned with getting their identity stolen. Which that goes back to the point we made earlier. I'm not confident, but I'm at ease. It's not going to happen to me. Well, think about this in our personal lives. Maybe it's our Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever it happens to be for you, for your even your Right Now Media content intake. But perhaps the office does share an Amazon account for the school, and maybe those credentials are shared under that keyboard for 3 different people. Or perhaps it's even a Gmail account. The more we think about it, a Walmart account, the more we think about it, we probably are doing some kind of sharing, even on Canva. Maybe we're sharing Canva accounts in our schools. And if a black hatter was trying to take our information and he knew the Canva password, well, perhaps maybe that's not too crazy far away from whatever the credentials would be for the banking password amongst the organization and whatnot. So these are, shared accounts, reusing credentials, just things we really want to stay away from. And if I could, just one more really simple one. Security.org and other places offer a password strengthening tool or a checker. So if I went in, and I'll use Matt as an example here. If I went into security.org and I used Matt's wife's maiden name, sometimes we're prompted to reset our password with a question about who we are, a question about something we remember. And so if I was going to use, I'll put it on my wife's maiden name, and her maiden name is Jochum, Yoakum. Pronouncing that one's always fun. But that's we got a six letter maiden name there. Well, why don't you consider adding a spoof to that? So whenever you're asked that question, in your mind, well, growing up in central West Pennsylvania or West Central Pennsylvania, we have the Altoona Curve. It's a minor league baseball team out there. So Altoona. I want to replace the O's there with zeros. I'm going to put a C on the end because they're the curve. So Altoona C, Yoakum. So now everything I answer, if all of those security questions, is going to begin with Altoona C. Well, at security.org, if you looked up Yoakum, the sixth letter, even with a capital letter, you're talking about someone, quote unquote, brute forcing, which is how they would break passwords, in something less than 1 hour. If you put Altoona C with the 2 zeros in front of it, we have literally taken, and you can look this up and find it, it literally would be around 100 trillion years. That's the difference. So just change for someone to actually go and try to brute force that password. So just generating some kind of false answer, adding a spoof to what your question responses would be. Just another really simple, get your mind wrapped around this sort of thing. And hey, we're probably gonna be stronger for it in the long run.
Yeah, I think there's a line of wisdom there for sure. I really like one of you mentioned it's kind of like leaving the door open. We say, well, it's inconvenient to have to keep opening and closing it. I think I'll just leave it open and we just invite everyone in. We can't believe it when they came in, but we left the door open. I think that's a great example. We get sloppy with things like passwords. Like, I don't want to have to remember 5 passwords. And when I change it, I have to change all my mobile devices too. So we tend to get lax for our own convenience. But honestly, we are putting a whole school at risk. So I love how you said that. And honestly, I was thinking, some schools, when I say, well, I don't have something that automatically prompts me to have to change my password after so many months, but that's something you could do as a school. If you think about it, if you don't have something, put it on your school calendar that every so many weeks, the whole school is changing. You can do the same thing in a manual way with your school. So I was just thinking about some of those things while you guys were talking. So here on our podcast, our heart is to be practical, and that's definitely what we're doing today. I really appreciate even what you've given us already. But as we wrap up the episode, I want to do that with a to-do list for our listeners. So if you have some really practical advice that they could take with them, where could they start? Things that they could start putting into place right now to advance their school in this area of cybersecurity. They might not necessarily be able to hire a professional to come in and work there today with them, but what are some practical things? So Mark, Matt, what are some tools that you would recommend that could be used to strengthen schools and just help keep cybersecurity affordable and at the forefront for Christian schools?
First one that comes to my mind, you don't have to spend a single penny. Just tell everybody to change their passwords. What you were just saying, putting it on the calendar. Let's make sure that we're doing that. Let's give them parameters as well, like using 12 characters, using so many capitals versus so many letters, numbers, so many symbols. But being very specific, being very purposeful in doing that. And even requiring, Mark brought up security.org, requiring the teachers to run their passwords through that just to see how strong they are. That's a very practical, easy step to take, and then tell your faculty we're going to be doing this again, and however frequently you would like to do that. And then I'll bring up one more, and then I'll turn it over to Mark. But just going to each classroom and saying, okay, I'm going to look at your desk. If I find a password, you're in for it. So let's
You
clean
lose.
those passwords away from the desk. Get rid of those. Yeah, you're done. Get those Post-it notes just out of the way. Let's secure them in a secure place if we do need help in finding those and remembering what they are. But having them secured, not having them out in the open.
And to jump off from Matt's point there are digital password banks and there's digital password saving tools. I don't want to throw out too many names in the podcast. We've already mentioned a couple that maybe you want to scratch out at some point, but at the very least,
No, this is
do
great.
know that
It's great.
there are third parties out there with free software for you to store your passwords on. Now, please make sure that it looks legitimate and that that you're not just handing out all your credentials. But there are ways of doing that, and there are secure third parties that will host passwords for, or at least you can make a personal account with them and set your passwords through them. Of course, if you are secure in your Google identity and use Chrome and whatnot, these browsers are now coming more and more built in with password managers. So if you're competent in using those, feel free to use those appropriately. Speaking more generally, I'll go back and then come forward. A big deal that we wrote about, because we're going to be published in the AACS Journal for Christian Education in a 3-part series on cybersecurity. So if you're a part of this organization, please check it out. One of the things that we said was that each of our schools, when we go through accreditation, right now there's no cybersecurity standards in either one of the accrediting bodies, which really, either one of the 3 ones that really our schools would probably be made up of. And that's interesting. I think that's going to change. And I hope they put me on that board at some point. But whenever that happens, before that happens, it's not, arguably, maybe it's not just as necessary as our physical security, but it is a big deal. And so having a team of people, a team of stakeholders on the front side, and Matt's referenced our peer, James, our good friend, James. James is a parent, James is a school board member, and James is a stakeholder outside of and in the industry. Matt himself is, of course, the administrator there at Faith Baptist School in Salisbury. And if there was maybe one other person, maybe a faculty representative, what you have there would be 3 knowledgeable and 3 knowledgeable stakeholders able to affect change, able to be the champions for change, able to be the champions for cybersecurity. So maybe your school just needs to create, first of all, at the upper level. And we think, of course, as Christian principals, we think for our podcast often like Christian principals, what should we be doing? Maybe you're setting up a leadership team. Maybe that's your first step, is identifying stakeholders and putting them into a vested body to actually start the change, make a change, be a change in that front. And past that, there's things that body could do and should do. We should make sure that, as Matt said, we're doing a physical walkthrough of the school and we're actually seeing how big is our attack footprint, so to speak. What are the ways in which, and this is probably more at the administrators or the IT workers, but hey, they listen to the TE as well here, I'm sure. Where am I weak? And then every year, one budgeted item to make sure that you're stronger in your cybersecurity stack. One item to make sure you're a little bit stronger year by year. Not one budget item. We're not going to be able to go commercial in cybersecurity upgrades in our technology in any one given swoop, unless that stakeholder happens to have a lot of money to help us out with, most likely our Christian schools. But if we could do one thing, if we could update our firewall, if we could get a third-party cybersecurity company to come in and help us out with those trainings every year. And I'll dovetail off into that now, as maybe one of the last few things to talk about would be, if there is no faculty staff training, there are absolutely ways for even the most competent IT person on the staff. And maybe for many of our schools, that might be a volunteer. That might be just a parent stakeholder. That could be the church member. That could be one of a number of people. But maybe that person who is on the staff or who is the stakeholder who is willing is able to come in and say, I can cobble together good practices concerning cybersecurity, and I can make a presentation to the faculty and the staff during orientation. And I can do that every year. So identifying that person and tasking them with that half an hour cybersecurity training. But past that, there are companies like KnowBe4, and KnowBe4, what they do is they actually help you set up phishing schemes. Now, crazy enough, and we don't talk to children, we don't talk to our students about things that they could, we take it very seriously as Christian principals and educators that we don't want to put ideas in their heads. Well, in this case, we don't really want to put ideas in somebody else's head either, but this is useful. So Know4 allows Matt to go and with a pretty simple user interface, create a phishing email that he could then send to his faculty, right? And so then we're in this fail-safe situation. We're looking for the people who are actually going to click on the button, send all those Amazon gift cards to whoever else it was. And they're not, and Matt is able to then go to those individuals or bring the stats back to that training and say, okay, this is how we did this month. This is where we were weak this month. And so there are free tools like Know4. YouTube gets a bad rap, but there are so many very useful resources on YouTube concerning cybersecurity that, again, that IT champion, and maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's the administrator, maybe it's your office assistant, whoever it happens to be, if they were tasked in their month with coming up with 10 minutes of YouTube videos to further strengthen the team and then pushing out those videos with the expectation is that everybody on the faculty staff is watching at least that video, how much stronger would we be? And again, we're looking at stacking these multiple layers because we're only going to be as strong as the weakest link, as we would all say. But more so than that, really, it's less the hardware and it's more the end user. We could do as much hardware training as we want, but I'll tell this story and I'll be quiet after that. But James talks about a ministry that he went to, and he did a little bit of social engineering. And social engineering would be the broader term for specific phishing types. And he went to this ministry, and before he got there, he looked on their Facebook page, and he realized that their ladies were having a luncheon at a specific restaurant. And so he said, I'm going to call the restaurant, and I'm going to get information about the group that's coming, and I'm going to get information about the reservation, and then I'm going to cancel that reservation. And so then he calls the church that he was going to go and to be, working with this training, I do some workshops with. And when he calls the church, he says to the lovely lady who picks up the phone, and we all are thinking in our minds of whoever our front desk person is, and they're smiley and they're happy and they're good at their jobs. But one of the things about being smiley and happy, good at your job in that way is you're probably a little bit trusting. You could be trusting without the right training. And so he gets on the phone and says, hey, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so restaurant, and we've canceled your reservation. We've had to cancel it because we don't have a credit card on file. So if you could just quick send me over that credit card, I won't be in trouble. You won't be in trouble. Like, no one will know maybe not no one will know the difference. Maybe that's wording too far. But if you can just do a little bit of figuring out a little bit about what they might want to hear, he's developed some fire, right? We have created the fire of, we're going to lose our spot at this restaurant that we have worked to get to. Oh, they just need our credit card really fast. Well, let me get the credit card. Well, that's a business credit card. That's a business credit card, probably with a high credit limit. It took a couple of phone calls. So we just need to be aware, and even, the most well-intentioned amongst us, we got to be aware that this is something we're just not able to, as Matt said when we were doing our review of this previously with James on the Christian Principles podcast, Matt said, that's it. Unplug the internet. We're done. Throw them away. It's done. Well, we can't, we live in the age we live in. We can't really do that. So
okay, but we didn't get the end of that story. So did they give the credit card?
He was not. He was. He identified. So
wow. But I mean, case in point, that's so true. Like that. That's what we do in this day and age. We're comfortable with handing out things. We just don't think about. We don't keep our guard up like we should. So excellent point there. Okay, so some things I just heard from what you just pointed out. Be purposeful and intentional. And that as Christian schools, if we don't make time for it, we'll get to May and realize we never did it. So I think purposeful and intentional, one item and one step forward. We can't do everything. Our budgets won't hold our time. The sun keeps going down somehow every night. We run out of hours. So finding one thing that we can work on. And I really like the idea of even self-training. Most Christian schools won't be able to pay for a professional to come in, but there are people even in local law enforcement. This is what they do. I bumped into many of them in different people that I've met. That's what they do. So if one of them could come in, often they will do that, just volunteer their time, or someone at your school, like you said, have them research it. I love identifying emails, the know before, that's a really good resource. We do that around here where we practice. We get sent all kinds of, you might get a raise, open this.
But that one's a lie from the start in the Christian school.
That's right, a Christian school. Yeah, we should never use that one. Right. Yeah. You might get a day off. No, that one wouldn't work either. No,
you got me. No way.
I don't know. Maybe a free lunch or donuts in the teacher's lounge, right?
Something. Teacher's lounge. Wait, you have one of those? Oh my goodness.
Yes, I know. With cold water even. Even passwords, working on their passwords, resetting them, helping. Those are things we can do. That doesn't cost money. That takes a little bit of time, but that's something that could be shared. So those were excellent. Okay, everyone. So I believe we can safely say that cybersecurity has been put on our radar. It is not too late. We can do something now, but it will be too late when our personal information, our student data is compromised. It's too late then to say, oh, I wish we would have. When our network or our financials are exposed to those without good intentions, it's too late. So listeners, now is the time to give this attention. Also, don't forget to check out their podcast. I want to throw that out there one more time, the Christian Principles Podcast. They cover more on this topic, but so many other practical topics. So go check that out as well. Mark and Matt, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. You've been so helpful.
Oh, this was fun. Thank you so much.
It was great.
Listeners, thanks for joining us today. I really hope you were encouraged more in this area, just like I was. Remember, go to teachereditionpodcast.com to submit questions for our upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Now, it's time to get back to your day, but it's not just any day. Every single day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power, but also through His grace working in you. Now go do what God has called you to do.